Welcome back, guys, to another episode review and breakdown for Stargirl Season 2. This is Episode 3, aka Summer School, Chapter 3. And again, the streak continues. I don't know if there's even a bad episode of this show. Like, this show can do no bad because every single episode is so good. And like I said, it continues here. It was another great episode, a really fun episode because we're introduced to new things like the Thunderbolt pen. We learn more about the Shade, and also probably my favorite part is that we just got to spend more time with Mike. Mike is a great character. He's honestly one of my favorite characters. I loved him in Season 1. He didn't really do much, but now in Season 2, now that he knows the identity of his whole family in the JSA and he knows all that stuff, you know, he's getting more screen time and he's getting more to do in the season, and I really enjoyed seeing that, especially here in this episode, because it was basically his episode. He was like the main character of this, and I really did enjoy seeing that. But anyways, guys, without further ado, we have a lot to talk about with this episode. So of course, spoiler warning if you have not yet seen Stargirl Season 2, Episode 3. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Alright, so we start off with a flashback to 11 years ago, Christmas Eve. And I just love this so much because you got the Christmas music playing, and it's definitely very reminiscent of actually how this whole series started with the very first episode of Stargirl Season 1, where it started. Christmas Eve, Pat, he was on his way to try and save the JSA, but then that was the night where the ISA killed all of them. So this scene here is honestly kind of like a prequel to the death of the JSA. It's like right before they're ready to head out so they can take down the ISA. And it was really cool because we're here in the JSA headquarters, or at least that's what I assume it is. You're in Pat's garage and you've got some cool stuff hanging up, like some cool newspaper articles with Starman and the Star-Spangled Kid. You've got the Star-Spangled Kid suit on display. You've got the picture of the 7 soldiers of victory. You've got the picture of the JSA. So it was really cool seeing this all here on display. There's some great Easter eggs, and honestly, just like this, the whole look of this JSA HQ and like everything we got from the scene honestly really makes me wish that we had just a JSA show. Like, just based off this one scene, I want a whole series about this because, like, I like the new JSA, but to just have, like, a TV show about this group of heroes just going out on missions, having this base of operations, I think that would be so cool to see. Unfortunately, you know, they're dead, so that's not happening. But this was a really cool scene because we did get introduced to Johnny Thunder, the original wielder of the Thunderbolt pen. And he's feeling kind of sad and lonely here because he feels like he's useless and like he just causes more trouble with the pen, and that the JSA just went off without him, and both he and Pat got benched while they go to take down the ISA. But then Wildcat pops up. Really cool to see Wildcat return. He's one of my favorite members, so really cool to see him here. And he actually says like, oh, they've got Solomon Grundy, so we need you. So then he takes Johnny Thunder, and Johnny's like, oh, don't worry, Pat, we'll get that eggnog when I get back. But of course, well, he didn't make it back, and that's really sad to think about. But then we get back to present day, where we meet up with Mike, and he is, of course, doing still his paper delivery service, getting his money, getting paid, doing his job, all that good stuff. And there's this part here where he gets a call from his boss, and he starts writing down an address, but then the pen stops working, so he goes to grab a different pen. And of course, that pen just so happens to be the pink pen, the Thunderbolt pen, which holds the Thunderbolt genie. So then he goes out and starts delivering papers, and then all of a sudden things start getting weird. He sees signs, he sees newspapers that all say "so cool" on them, and obviously he says "so cool," and turns out "so cool" is actually the magic words that summons Thunderbolt. So Mike said it, so now Thunderbolt has been summoned. Mike falls over, and Thunderbolt just pops out of the pen, and now you've got this giant pink ghost genie, voiced by Jim Gaffigan, just ready to cause some mischief. And I do like that they actually clarify the rules here, because of course with all genies there's certain rules. Like, first of all, here specifically rule number 1, you have to be specific with your wishes. Mike's like, oh, I want to be taller, and then he just like gets up on top of a bench, and it's like, oh, you have to be specific. I want my body taller. So then there's other rules, like he can't wish for the same thing twice. He can't wish that people were dead. He can't wish that people that are already dead were brought back to life. There's just a couple rules there, and I like that they clarified that here in this episode. But meanwhile, Pat is holding a JSA meeting at his garage where he is telling everybody about the Shade. He's back in town, and he's bad news. He controls shadows, and now the JSA has to take him down. And Beth specifically really has some motivation here because she finds out that the Shade is actually the one that killed the original Dr. Midnight. He killed Chuck, so she's definitely got some motivation here to go after the Shade. Barbara's also got her own little story going on here as we get a really cool scene here because we saw in the first episode that Richard Swift, aka The Shade, actually visited her and mentioned the collection of William Zarek, aka The Wizard, who was one of the villains in the first season. So she goes to actually investigate this collection. Of course, guess what happens? Richard Swift pops up. He's just all of a sudden in there, and of course she's startled at first, and they're just looking around, and we find out that he is actually looking for Eclipso, and he finds the box that the original Eclipso, the Black Diamond, was inside of, but as we saw at the end of season 1, Cindy stole it, and we've seen her do a couple things with that in the first 2 episodes here, but now we know that the Shade is also after Eclipso, but the question is why? And we get an answer to that at the end of the episode, but we'll talk about that later. So let's get back to Mike, because Mike is still trying to figure out how the Thunderbolt pen works. He's still trying to learn how to make wishes specific enough and all that good stuff. And of course, things go wrong. Then Yolanda and Courtney actually show up, and they actually take him back to Pat's garage, where Pat is like, no, you can't have that. It's too dangerous. And he tries to take it from him. But of course, Thunderbolt is like, no, he's my new master now, so you can't take him from me. And then we actually get a really cool one-on-one scene between Pat and Thunderbolt, which was a really emotional scene because first of all, you have Thunderbolt talking about like the last wish that Johnny Thunder ever made, and that he's sad about that. And then Pat's like, well, why Mike? Why did you choose Mike? And this was so interesting because Thunderbolt says that you know that I can only choose a host who is just like me, trapped and alone and feeling all this loneliness and depression. And obviously Pat is really sad to hear that his son Mike is feeling this way. And, you know, obviously it's not completely his fault, but it is partially his fault for leaving him out of all this JSA stuff, because that's all he wants. That's all Mike wants, is he just wants to be part of the family. He just wants to be part of the JSA. So now, because of this, and also due to a little convincing from the rest of the JSA, Pat decides, alright Mike, you can help us use the Thunderbolt pen to try and track down the Shade. And that is exactly what happens. They get an exact location. Turns out he's actually hiding out at the Zarek's residence, because all of them are dead, so nobody's living there anymore. So that is where the Shade is currently hiding out. But he benches Mike. He's like, alright, we're gonna go take him down. Mike, you stay here. You can just stay at the pit stop. So we got our whole JSA team. They're all suited up, and they go to the Zarek residence, where they find the Shade is actually there waiting for them. He's just sitting there, you know, drinking his tea, and he's got all his biscuits and all that stuff, and he's basically waiting for them. And he's like, I don't want to fight, just sit down and we can talk. And they talk a little bit. We don't really get any huge information here, because all of a sudden Mike shows up, because you know, he's a crafty little boy, and he shows up and he makes his wish. He's like, you know, Thunderbolt, take down the Shade and all this stuff. But crazy stuff happens here, because the Shade is able to very, very easily take down not only Thunderbolt, but also after Mike shows up, the rest of the JSA starts attacking the Shade, and the Shade just takes him all out super duper easily. I mean, he's literally sitting down this whole time. He's just like doing this all with his mind, because of course he can control shadows, and he's just a lot more powerful than they expected him to be. And then the last thing he says here is basically just stay out of my way, and then poof, he's gone again. He just teleported away with his cool shadow powers, and everybody is feeling defeated, especially Mike, because again, he feels like it's all his fault, and he's already feeling lonely. And this was one of my favorite parts here, because we get a little bit of a conversation between Mike and Yolanda, because they have something in common here, because in the season 1 finale, obviously Yolanda murdered Brainwave, and that's something we've seen her dealing with a little bit of PTSD in the first couple episodes here, and we know she's going to be dealing with throughout the rest of the season, and could possibly tie into her even getting corrupted by Eclipso. But also you have to keep in mind that Mike, he technically murdered Icicle, even though it was an accident. I do like that she brought that up here, and she like asked like how he felt about it, and it was an accident with him, but with her, she completely did it on purpose. So that's definitely fueling that fire, and is going to help push her story forward further in this season, which I'm really excited to see. But now we get into the ending of this episode, where we got a little bit of tease for the rest of the season to come here. Like, for example, with Mike, we get a little bit of a resolution here, because this is something I was really wondering about, because in the comics, the second person to take on the mantle of Thunderbolt was Jakeem, obviously, who's been referenced in the show multiple times as Mike's friend, and would become Jakeem Thunder. So when we saw this first happening, I was wondering, alright, so if Mike has the pen, how is it going to eventually end up with Jakeem? And this is exactly how it happens, because, again, Mike is feeling sad, and he feels responsible for all this, so he says, I wish that the pen was in better hands. And at this moment, he does it on accident, he accidentally wishes this, but then the pen disappears. And it does indeed go into better hands, and that is, of course, Jakeem, again, Mike's friend, who's played by Alcoya Bronson here. So that was a really cool tease and some nice setup to see that now we're going to be getting Jakeem Thunder, and I'm really excited to see that. I'm really excited to see him join the JSA, and, he seems kind of like literally his sister was calling him a loser, so I feel like he'll fit right in with the JSA, and finally, now Mike will have not only a friend, but someone on the JSA that he can talk to that's also his same age. So that's definitely going to be good for both of those characters. I'm really excited to see that. Then Barbara tells Pat about what went on earlier when she was in the storage, and how Richard Swift took that box that originally held the Black Diamond. And automatically, Pat knows exactly what this is. He knows what the Black Diamond is, where it came from, and all this good stuff. And this then relates to the ending of this episode. But before we talk about that, we have something quick here with Beth, where she's talking to Rick about her parents possibly getting divorced. So that was a nice emotional scene that I enjoyed seeing there. But then all of a sudden, Chuck comes online just for a few seconds. He still has no idea who Beth is, but he says, you're in danger, you need to get out of here, Eclipso is coming. And whoa, just these last couple scenes of this episode is all setting up Eclipso, especially in this final part where we have a nice shot of the Shade. He, I believe, is up on the rooftop of the American Dream, and he opens up the box and he says he's going to kill all those children, obviously referring to Eclipso doing this whole thing where he goes around killing children and just killing people and absorbing their souls, as we saw examples of in the first couple episodes. So this is something that really hints at you that the Shade isn't really the villain you may think he is, because in the comics, that's not what he is. Like, sure, he is sometimes a villain, and he has villainous ideas and villainous ways of doing things, but he's more so an anti-hero. So I like that you're seeing that here. The whole reason he wanted to get the Eclipso, the Black Diamond thing, was just so that he could keep it out of the hands of somebody like Cindy that could do some real damage with this. So it's nice to see that you're seeing now this other side of the Shade. But guys, that is where this episode ends, and we get a great teaser for next week's episode with the return of both Sportsmaster and Tigers, who have now apparently broken out of prison. And not only that, but now they're teaming up with the JSA and Pat, so that is going to be awesome. They were some of my favorite parts of the first season. I love that iteration of Sportsmaster, so I'm super excited to see them back. Don't know for sure if they're going to suit up or anything, but really excited to see that they're coming back in this season. Not at all expecting that, but yeah, guys, I'm excited for next week. I love today's episode, or last night's episode by the time you're seeing this video. Yeah, another great episode. Loved all this setup going on with Thunderbolt pen leading into Jakeem, all this stuff with Eclipso, the Shade.